Under the pale light of Lyrian Prime's dying sun, the air smelled of rust and smoke. Tall towers once shining with alien energy now stood broken, leaning like bones of a fallen giant. Captain Ethan Ward, the last human officer stationed on the planet, walked through the empty street with slow steps. The war had ended weeks ago, but the silence felt heavier than any battle he had fought. He carried a small duffel bag and an old data chip, the last record of his mission. Everything else had been lost. His friends, his unit, even his reason to fight. He told himself he was done with this world, done with promises of peace that always turned to ashes. The last shuttle off this planet waited for him in the docking bay. He only needed to reach it and leave. The metal doors of the bay opened with a hiss and the sound echoed across the empty space. His ship, a small human-built vessel named Dawnlight, rested quietly in the corner. Ethan stared at it for a long moment, feeling the pull of escape. He wanted to leave this cursed place, to forget the smell of burned metal and broken hearts. But before he could move closer, a faint sound reached his ears. It was soft, almost fragile, like a whisper trying to survive in the storm. He turned sharply, hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm that was no longer there. "Please," the voice said again, trembling. "Don't go." Ethan froze. It wasn't a human voice. It had a strange tone, musical but filled with exhaustion. He followed the sound toward the shadows near a row of broken crates. There, half hidden by debris, a young alien girl struggled to stand. Her skin shimmered faintly, silver mixed with faint blue veins of light. One of her arms was injured, wrapped with what looked like a torn banner. "You shouldn't be here," Ethan said quietly, stepping closer. "The Valari have taken back this city. If they find you with me, we're both dead." The girl tried to smile, though her voice was weak. "The Valari don't want me. They said I betrayed them. I spoke to a human once and they called me cursed." Ethan looked around the bay, then back at her. Part of him wanted to walk away. She wasn't his problem. She was an alien, and he had seen too much of their cruelty during the war. But her eyes stopped him. They were large and glowing softly, full of fear, but also something else. Hope. He sighed deeply. "What's your name?" "Lyra," she whispered. "Lyra Velthar." "Lyra," he repeated. "You need to get out of here. I can't help you." "My mission is over." "Then why do you look so sad?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "If you're free, why do your eyes look like they lost something?" Her words hit him harder than any weapon. He turned away, trying to focus on the ship. "Because leaving doesn't always mean you're free," he said softly. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, as he started walking, she said, "You're the last one, aren't you? The last human here?" "Yes," he replied. "And I'm about to change that." She hesitated, her voice breaking. "Please, don't leave me here. I have nowhere to go." He stopped at the ship's ramp, his hand hovering over the control pad. He could feel the hum of the engines waiting for his command. Every part of him screamed to leave, to escape the pain, the memories, the ghosts. But then he remembered the sound of her voice, fragile yet defiant, like someone refusing to vanish quietly. He turned back. "There's a med kit inside. Get your wound treated. After that, you go your own way. Understand?" Lyra nodded slowly. She limped toward the ramp, her bare feet leaving faint marks of glowing dust on the metal. Ethan watched her carefully. When she reached the door, she paused and looked up at him. "You said you wanted to leave," she murmured. "Then why did you stop when I spoke?" He didn't answer. He just turned and walked inside. The interior of the Dawnlight was small but clean. Panels glowed softly, casting a warm light across the cabin. Lyra moved quietly, touching the walls as if afraid the ship would vanish. Ethan handed her the medkit, then sat down at the control seat. For a long time, neither spoke. The storm outside roared against the bay doors, lightning flashing across the cracked sky. Ethan stared at the stars through the window, thinking of Earth. His home felt like a dream now, distant and unreal. Finally, Lyra broke the silence. "They say humans have hearts made of fire," she said softly. "But you look like yours is made of stone." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "Fire turns to ash when there's nothing left to burn." "Then why are you still here?" she asked. "Habit," he said. "Orders. Maybe guilt." She tilted her head. "You saved people during the war. My sister said a human soldier carried her child through the firestorm. That was you, wasn't it?" Ethan's hands tightened on the armrest. That was a long time ago. She said he never spoke his name, but she remembered his eyes. They were kind even when everything burned. He looked at her, speechless. He hadn't expected to hear that story again. "Your sister?" He started, but the words stuck in his throat. She died, Lyra said quietly, but she told me to remember the human who saved her. She said if I ever met him, I should thank him for showing mercy. Ethan lowered his gaze. Something heavy settled in his chest, a mix of grief and guilt. Mercy doesn't win wars, he said. No, Lyra replied gently, but it makes them worth surviving. The words hung in the air like a whisper of peace in a world that had forgotten it. Ethan turned off the engines and leaned back. For the first time in months, he didn't feel the need to run. Outside, the storm eased. The city lights flickered weakly, fighting the darkness. Lyra sat near the power conduit, wrapping her arm after cleaning the wound. The glow beneath her skin dimmed slowly as the healing patch took effect. That light, Ethan said suddenly. Does it hurt? She shook her head. It's what keeps us alive. It's part of who we are. He nodded, his voice quiet. Humans used to have something like that once. We called it hope. She smiled faintly. Maybe you still do. Maybe it's just hiding. He didn't reply. He watched her for a while, the strange warmth in his chest growing stronger. Hours passed. Lyra drifted into sleep, resting against the wall. Ethan stayed awake, staring at the faint blue star far beyond the clouds. Earth, his home. He wanted to go back, to forget this place. But when he looked at the sleeping alien girl, fragile yet peaceful, he couldn't move. He remembered her first words. Please don't go. They echoed in his mind, soft but unshakable. Morning came slowly. The light outside was pale and cold. Ethan still sat by the control panel, staring at the blinking launch icon. All he had to do was press it and the ship would rise, leaving the planet and everything on it behind. But his hand didn't move. He looked at Lyra again. She stirred slightly in her sleep, her hand twitching near her injured arm. Her breathing was slow and calm. Ethan exhaled. What are you doing to me, kid? He muttered to himself. The ship remained still. The engines never started, and though he told himself it was only for one more hour, deep down he knew he wasn't leaving. Not yet. Not while her voice still echoed in his heart, stopping him cold every time he tried to walk away. He didn't understand why, but for the first time in months he felt something human again, and that was enough to stay. The morning on Lyrian Prime came with a pale golden light that crept through cracks in the ceiling of the docking bay. Ethan woke up in the pilot's chair, still sitting where he had fallen asleep. His head ached faintly, and the hum of the Dawnlight's idle systems filled the silence. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then he saw her. Lyra sat quietly near the engine core, her knees pulled to her chest. The soft glow under her skin had dimmed through the night. She looked weaker but calm, watching the thin rays of sunlight filtering through the roof. Ethan rubbed his face and stood up. You're still here, he said, his voice rough. She looked up and nodded. You didn't leave. He didn't answer. He moved to the control panel and checked the system readings. The ship was fine, ready to fly. The planet's atmosphere was clear enough to launch. Every reason told him to go. Yet his hand stayed still over the controls. He turned back to her. I told you I'd help you get your wound fixed. After that, you're on your own. She nodded again but didn't move. I know, but can I ask you something first? He sighed. What? Why do humans fight so much? The question caught him off guard. He blinked. Because sometimes we have to. Sometimes to protect. Sometimes because we're scared. Scared of what? She asked quietly. He hesitated. Of losing what we care about. Of being forgotten. Lyra tilted her head slightly. Then you and the Valari are not so different. We fight for the same reason. Ethan gave a small smile, one that held more pain than humor. Maybe that's why peace never lasts. Both sides think they're protecting something. She lowered her gaze. And in the end, we both lose it. They sat in silence for a while. The wind outside carried the faint echo of the ruined city, whispering through empty buildings. Ethan could see the broken skyline, towers cracked open like ribs of a dead world. Finally, Lyra stood up, swaying a little. There's something I need to show you, she said. Show me? Ethan frowned. What are you talking about? A place, she said softly. Before the war, my people called it the Garden of Echoes. It's not far from here. I used to go there with my sister. I want to see it one last time. You're in no shape to travel, he said. And it's dangerous out there. She met his eyes. I know. But you said once leaving doesn't always mean you're free. I don't want to die here trapped under metal and ghosts. He stared at her, torn between reason and something he couldn't name. She was right. This place was full of ghosts. And maybe seeing it through her eyes would help him understand why he couldn't leave. Fine, he said finally. But if we go armed. She smiled faintly. Humans and their weapons. Habit, he muttered. They left the ship and stepped into the quiet ruins. The streets were covered in dust and fragments of glowing crystals that had once powered the city. As they walked, the sound of their footsteps echoed softly through the silence. The world around them felt like it had stopped breathing. Burned signs, collapsed bridges, rusted machines, all reminders of a civilization that had fought too hard to survive. Ethan kept his hand close to his sidearm, scanning for movement, but the planet seemed empty. After a long walk, they reached what looked like a broken courtyard. A massive gate stood half buried in rubble, its carvings still faintly glowing with blue light. Beyond it stretched a field of twisted metal vines and patches of shimmering plants that pulsed with soft color. This was the garden, Lyra whispered. It used to sing when the wind touched the crystals. Now it only remembers. Ethan looked around in quiet awe. Even in ruin, the place was hauntingly beautiful. Glowing petals drifted across the air like tiny stars. Lyra knelt beside a cracked stone pillar, brushing dust away from its surface. Etched into the stone was a symbol. 2 hands reaching toward each other, one human, one Valari. Ethan froze when he saw it. What is that? He asked. It's old, she said softly, from before the wars. Our ancestors believed humans and Valari once shared a dream. To explore the stars together. He frowned. That's not in any record I've read. Because both sides buried it, she replied. It's easier to fight when you forget you were once friends. Ethan felt something heavy settle in his chest. He looked at the symbol again. 2 hands reaching, almost touching, but never quite meeting. My sister believed that story, Lyra continued. She said there would come a time when one human would remind the galaxy what kindness means. He stared at her, startled. That's just a story. Maybe, she said, smiling faintly. But sometimes stories are all we have left. The wind rose again, carrying with it the faint hum of energy. Ethan watched the petals glow around them, thinking how strange it was. This quiet peace between enemies, standing in the ashes of everything their species had destroyed. As they turned to leave, a low rumble echoed across the sky. Ethan looked up sharply. 3 silver ships appeared on the horizon, cutting through the clouds. His instincts kicked in immediately. Valari patrols, he muttered. We need to move. Lyra's face went pale. They'll scan for life signs. They'll know I'm with you. Then we run, Ethan said, grabbing her hand. They dashed through the ruins, slipping between broken structures and narrow alleys. The ships descended lower, their searchlights slicing through the dust. Ethan pulled her into an old maintenance tunnel just as a beam of light passed overhead. They crouched in the darkness, breathing hard. Lyra trembled slightly, her injured arm pressed against her chest. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, whispering, Stay quiet. For several tense minutes they listened to the distant hum of engines. Finally the sound faded away. Ethan exhaled slowly, the adrenaline fading. You okay? He asked. She nodded weakly. I think so. Thank you. He smiled faintly. You're welcome. When they climbed back out, the sky was dark again, painted with streaks of purple and blue. The stars had begun to shine. Ethan looked up, feeling the old ache in his chest return. Earth is up there, he said softly. Somewhere beyond that cluster. Lyra followed his gaze. And you miss it? Every day, he admitted. But sometimes I think, maybe I stayed too long in places that weren't home. Home isn't always where you're born, she said. It's where someone waits for you. Her words caught him off guard. He looked at her, truly looked. There was no hatred in her eyes, no suspicion, only quiet trust. He had spent so long fighting her kind, yet here she was, standing beside him under a broken sky. He felt something stir inside. A small, fragile warmth he thought he had lost forever. They walked back in silence, the sound of their footsteps mixing with the soft hum of the wind. By the time they reached the ship, the stars above were clear. Inside the dawnlight, Lyra sat near the viewport, her eyes reflecting the light of distant suns. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You really believe humans and Valari could have been friends? He asked. I believe they still can, she said softly. Maybe not today, but someday. He watched her for a moment longer, then turned to the controls. You should rest. We'll figure out our next move in the morning. As she closed her eyes, he whispered to himself, next move, like he was still pretending to plan an escape he no longer wanted. The ship was quiet again, but it felt different this time. Not empty, not lonely. For the first time since the war began, Ethan Ward felt something he couldn't name. A strange peace, fragile but real. And as he looked at the sleeping alien girl whose voice had stopped him from leaving, he knew one truth he couldn't deny anymore. He wasn't staying out of duty or guilt. He was staying because he wanted to. The next morning came quietly. Pale light filtered through the clouds as GalacticPrime lay still. Wrapped in a silence that almost felt peaceful, Ethan woke early, moving around the cockpit while Lyra still slept near the viewport. The faint silver glow under her skin pulsed softly, like a heartbeat in rhythm with the ship's hum. He looked at her for a long time. She looked fragile. Too young to have lived through a war like this. He wondered how she had survived when whole fleets had vanished and cities had turned to dust. When she stirred awake, her eyes opened slowly. "You were watching me," she said softly, her tone calm but curious. Ethan turned away quickly. "Just making sure you were still breathing." She smiled faintly. Humans always hide their kindness behind cold words. He ignored that and handed her a ration bar. "Eat. We might need to move soon." She took it, studying the wrapper like it was some kind of strange treasure. "It smells awful." "It tastes worse," he said dryly, sitting beside her. "But it'll keep you alive." She laughed softly, the sound echoing lightly in the ship. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. He didn't realize how much he'd missed that sound. The simple proof of life. As they ate, Lyra looked out at the sky beyond the cracked window. "Those patrol ships," she said quietly. "They weren't just looking for survivors. They were hunting me." Ethan frowned. "Why you?" "Because I know something I wasn't supposed to," she said, her expression darkening. "During the war, I worked in a communication station near the capital. I overheard transmissions, messages between our leaders and someone else. Someone human." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What kind of messages?" "They weren't about peace," she said. "They were planning how to keep the war going." Her words hit him like a cold wind. "You're saying both sides wanted this war to continue?" She nodded slowly. "There were people who profited from it. The weapons, the colonies, the fear. It made them powerful. Anyone who tried to stop it disappeared. My sister found out and told me to run. She didn't make it out." Ethan stared at the floor, his thoughts spinning. He remembered how his superiors had always delayed peace talks, always found new reasons to fight. He had believed it was strategy. Now it sounded like something far worse. "That's why you were hiding," he said quietly. "Yes," she whispered. "I was supposed to be taken to a camp, but they came for me before I could escape. I ran until there was nowhere left." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "So if the patrols catch you?" "They'll silence me," she finished for him. "And they'll call it justice." The silence in the ship grew heavy. Ethan stood and walked to the control panel, staring at the blinking coordinates. He could leave, fly away, and forget everything. But if what she said was true, leaving her meant letting the truth die too. "You can't stay here," he said finally. "They'll find you sooner or later. And if they see my ship, they'll destroy it." Lyra looked at him calmly. "So what will you do?" "I'll get you off this planet," he said. "There's an old relay station in the mountains. If it still works, we can send a signal to the neutral colonies. Someone might come. And if they don't?" she asked softly. "Then I'll figure something out," he said. "I always do." Her expression softened. "You sound like my sister." He glanced back at her. She must have been brave. "She was," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "She used to say courage isn't about fighting. It's about standing when you have every reason to fall." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then she would have liked Earth." She tilted her head. "Why?" "Because that's how we survived," he said. "Earth's not gentle. It breaks you, but if you keep getting up, it starts to respect you." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why I trust you." His heart skipped a beat at her words, though he didn't show it. He turned away quickly, starting the engines. "Get ready. It's a long climb to those mountains." The ship lifted from the ground with a soft roar, dust swirling beneath it. As they rose higher, the city spread out below them like a shattered mirror. Lyra pressed her hand to the glass, watching her home fade into distance. "It's strange," she whispered. "Even when everything is gone, it still feels like home." Ethan glanced at her. "Home isn't a place. It's the memories you carry." "Then you carry too many," she said gently. He didn't answer. The flight took them over endless plains of broken towers and rust-colored forests. Lightning danced far on the horizon, the planet's storms raging as always. Ethan guided the ship carefully, keeping them below radar range. Hours later, they reached the mountains. Jagged peaks rose from the mist like ancient guardians, dark and silent. Halfway up the slope stood an old relay tower, half buried in snow and ash. Its metal frame was twisted, but the signal light still flickered faintly. "Looks like it's still alive," Ethan said. "Can it send a message?" Lyra asked. "We'll find out." They landed on a small ledge near the entrance. As they stepped outside, cold wind bit through their clothes. Lyra shivered slightly, wrapping her arms around herself. Ethan gave her his jacket without thinking. She looked at him in surprise. "You'll freeze." "I've been through worse," he said simply. Inside the station, dust covered everything. Old screens flickered weakly, and cables hung from the ceiling like vines. Ethan powered up a console, rerouting energy from the dawnlight. The system came online with a low hum. "If we can get this transmitter working," he said, "we can send a distress call to any neutral ship still in orbit." Lyra stood beside him, watching his hands move quickly across the controls. "You really know how to fix things," she said softly. "Used to," he replied, "before everything broke." After a few minutes, the transmitter crackled to life. Ethan entered a coded message, short and clear. "Survivor extraction request, human Valeri civilian, priority urgent." The signal beeped weakly, then vanished into static. "It's sent," he said. "Now we wait." Lyra looked at the stars through a broken window. "Do you think anyone will come?" He shrugged. "I don't know, but we had to try." They sat near the console, sharing quiet warmth in the cold air. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks of the old tower. Ethan found himself watching her again. The way her silver skin reflected the pale light. The quiet determination in her eyes despite the fear behind them. "You shouldn't trust me this much," he said suddenly. "Why not?" she asked. "Because humans aren't perfect," he said. "We've done terrible things." "I've done terrible things," she shook her head. "And yet you stayed when you could have left." "That's not terrible, Ethan. That's brave." He looked away, not trusting his voice to answer. Hours passed. The console beeped suddenly, cutting through the silence. Ethan jumped up. A faint signal blinked on the screen. A reply. He read the code quickly. Someone received it. "They're on their way." Lyra's eyes widened. "How long?" 3 hours, he said, relief flooding his chest. But before they could speak further, a harsh alarm blared through the console. Red lights flashed across the walls. "Incoming signatures," Ethan said, his voice turning cold. "Not human, not neutral." Lyra's face went pale. "The Valari patrols, they must have traced the signal." Ethan grabbed his rifle. "Stay behind me," she caught his arm. "Ethan, if they find me, they'll kill you too." "Then they'll have to try," he said grimly. Outside, the distant roar of engines grew louder. Blue lights flickered across the mountains as 3 sleek ships approached fast. Ethan turned toward the window, watching them descend like hawks circling prey. Lyra's hand tightened around his sleeve. "You should go," she whispered. "Take the ship and leave." "I'll surrender," he turned sharply. "Not a chance." "They're my people. They're soldiers following orders," he interrupted. "You said yourself, they'll silence you." "I'm not letting that happen." Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed calm. "Why?" He looked at her, his expression steady. "Because your voice stopped me once, and I'm not letting it go silent now." The mountain shook as the first blast hit nearby. Dust fell from the ceiling. Ethan aimed his weapon toward the entrance, his pulse steady. "Stay down, Lyra," he said. She nodded, crouching beside the console. The sky outside burned with light as enemy ships closed in. The war he thought was over had found him again. But this time he wasn't fighting for orders or pride. He was fighting for a promise he didn't know he'd made, one whispered, in an alien voice that had stopped him cold and made him remember what it meant to be human. The engines roared closer, the mountain trembling beneath their power. Ethan took a deep breath, ready to stand once more. The air outside the relay tower shook with thunder as enemy ships descended through the mountain clouds. Blue streaks of plasma fire cut across the sky, turning snow into steam. Inside the crumbling structure, Ethan steadied his rifle and listened to the growing roar. The old station trembled with every impact. Lyra crouched behind a console, her hands trembling. "They've locked onto us," she whispered. "I know," Ethan said calmly, scanning the shadows near the door. "Stay low. Don't move until I say." She nodded, though her eyes never left him. He moved like a man who had faced death too many times before. Focused, quiet, ready. The first explosion tore through the outer wall. Light and smoke burst inside. 3 Valari soldiers in shining armor stepped through the breach, weapons raised. Their glowing eyes swept the room. "Identify yourself," one barked in the Valari tongue. Ethan didn't wait. He fired first. The pulse from his rifle hit the lead soldier square in the chest, throwing him back against the wall. The others dove for cover, shouting orders. Lyra flinched at the sound, pressing her hands over her ears. The air smelled of burned metal. Ethan moved fast, sliding behind a pillar and firing again. His shots were precise, controlled. 2 more soldiers fell, their armor sparking. A sudden flash of blue light ripped across the room, hitting the ground near his feet. The shockwave threw him backward. He hit the floor hard, his weapon skidding away. Lyra gasped and ran toward him. "Ethan!" He pushed himself up, coughing through the smoke. "Stay back!" A tall figure stepped through the smoke. Another Valari officer, his armor black with gold markings. His voice echoed coldly. "So this is the human who hides our traitor." Ethan raised his weapon again. "You've got the wrong man." "Do I?" The officer sneered. "You send a distress signal and we follow it here. You stand beside a marked exile. Tell me, human, what do you call that?" "Mercy," Ethan said flatly. The officer's eyes narrowed. "Mercy is weakness," Ethan fired again. The shot hit the officer's shoulder, spinning him halfway around. The alien staggered but stayed on his feet. His return blast hit the wall near Ethan, showering sparks across the room. Lyra screamed as the floor cracked open from the impact. Snow and smoke poured through the gap. Ethan grabbed her hand, pulling her back toward the far corridor. "Run!" he shouted. They sprinted through the narrow passage as more explosions rocked the tower. Metal beams fell around them and the ceiling began to collapse. They reached the docking ledge outside just as a burst of fire consumed the control room behind them. The dawnlight sat waiting, half buried in snow but still intact. Ethan opened the hatch and shoved Lyra inside. "Strap in," he yelled, jumping into the pilot's seat. The ship roared to life, engines screaming as they lifted from the cliff. Enemy fire streaked past them, exploding against the rocks. Ethan pushed the throttle forward, weaving through the narrow mountain paths. "They're right behind us," Lyra cried, gripping the seat. "Hold on," Ethan shouted. The dawnlight shot upward through a gap in the clouds. One of the enemy ships followed close behind, firing repeatedly. Each shot shook the vessel. Warning lights flashed red across the cockpit. "Engines are overheating," Lyra said, reading the display. "Then we go faster," Ethan replied. He turned sharply, guiding the ship between 2 peaks. The enemy tried to follow, but the narrow gap was too small. One of the alien ships clipped a rock and exploded in a burst of light. The shockwave rattled their hull, but Ethan held firm. Only one pursuer remained. It stayed close, refusing to break off. Ethan's mind raced. The ship was too damaged for open combat. He needed a way to escape without getting them both killed. "Lyra, can you access the comm panel?" he asked quickly. "Yes," she said, sliding beside him. "Reroute power from the secondary coils to the rear thrusters. I'll try to loop us around that ridge." She worked fast, her glowing fingers flying over the controls. "Done!" Ethan pulled the ship into a sharp dive, then twisted hard to the left. The sudden maneuver threw them sideways, pressing them against the seats. The pursuing ship followed, straight into the path of a collapsing ridge. The explosion lit up the clouds, scattering debris and fire. The radar went clear. "We lost them," Lyra whispered, relief flooding her voice. Ethan exhaled slowly, hands shaking on the controls. "Not bad for an old ship," she smiled weakly. "Not bad for an old soldier." They climbed higher, breaking through the last layer of cloud. Above them stretched the endless night sky, filled with stars. Lyra stared out at the view, her eyes reflecting the light. "We made it," she said softly. "We're safe." Ethan checked the long-range scanner. "For now." But that distress signal, it worked. "Someone's coming." She looked at him, her expression caught between hope and fear. "And what will you do when they arrive?" He paused, then answered honestly. "I don't know." The silence between them was gentle this time, filled with the quiet hum of space beyond the clouds. After a few minutes, the comm unit beeped. A faint voice came through the static. "Unidentified vessel, this is Neutral Command Ship Aurora. We received your signal. Please respond." Ethan leaned forward. "This is Captain Ethan Ward of the Dawnlight. I'm with a civilian survivor, requesting immediate evacuation." "Copy that, Dawnlight," the voice replied. "Stand by. We'll reach your position in 15 minutes. Lyra's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Someone answered?" He nodded. Looks like it. But as the minutes passed, he noticed something strange. The scanner showed not one but two signatures approaching, the Aurora and another ship behind it. His chest tightened. Lyra, he said quietly. If they find you, they'll take you away. And if they take you back to your people... She looked down. I know. They won't let me live. He turned off the autopilot and faced her. Then we need to make a choice. You can go with them and hide among the colonies, or you can stay with me. Her eyes widened. Stay with you? But humans and Valari don't always have to be enemies, he said gently. We proved that. She stared at him for a long moment. If I stay, they'll call you a traitor. They already did, he said softly. Long before I met you. She smiled through her tears. Then maybe we're both traitors. The radar beeped again. The Aurora's ship appeared through the clouds, a sleek white vessel surrounded by soft blue light. It hovered near them, scanning. Ethan opened the channel. Aurora, this is Dawnlight. Transmitting coordinates now. Received, the pilot replied. Prepare for docking. As the ships aligned, Lyra reached for his hand. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. He squeezed her hand gently. You stopped me from leaving when I thought nothing could. Maybe that means something. The docking clamps locked into place with a soft click. The airlock opened, flooding the cabin with white light. Neutral officers stepped through, weapons lowered. Captain Ward? One asked. That's me, Ethan said. This one's with me. She's under my protection. The officer nodded slowly. Understood. You both are safe now. Lyra looked back one last time at the broken planet below, her home fading beneath layers of clouds and storm. Her voice was barely a whisper. Goodbye, sister. They followed the officers through the airlock into the bright corridors of the Aurora. For the first time in years, Ethan felt warmth that wasn't from fire or battle. Hours later, as the Aurora moved through orbit, he stood near the observation deck, watching Lyrian Prime shrink into the distance. Lyra joined him quietly. What happens now? She asked. We start over, he said. Maybe find a world where people don't care what we were, only who we choose to be. She smiled softly. And if the galaxy doesn't want that? He looked at her with a calm, steady gaze. Then the galaxy will have to learn. The stars stretched endlessly before them, cold, beautiful, and full of unknown paths. As the Dawnlight's wreckage drifted away below, Ethan realized something he hadn't felt in years, hope. And standing beside him, the alien girl whose voice had once stopped him, Cold smiled faintly, her hand brushing his. In that moment, neither of them were soldiers or enemies. They were simply two survivors bound by a war that had failed to destroy what mattered most. The simple, stubborn heart that still believed peace was possible. And somewhere deep inside the quiet hum of the Aurora, a new chapter of their story began.